Nifty.
The market basically is almost moved back to the high point of the day. We're up about 20 points. Market down about 16, 17 points at 10,814.
At least today, the market seems to have found some kind of support at around the 10,800 mark. Navneet Gill has been announced the MD and CEO of Yes Bank with effect from March 1. That's the big breaking news that we have at this point in time.
A late rally erases earlier losses on Dalal Street. Sensex and Nifty end with minor gains, but mid-caps underperform. The index ends in the red.
Yes Bank appoints Deutsche Bank's Ravneet Gill as its next managing director and CEO. His appointment will be effective from the 1st of March. The stock rallies over 9%, lifting the markets in late trade.
UltraTech Cement reports mixed quarter. It's a beat on the top line, but input costs spike leading to a miss in margins. The stock ends 2% in the red. Bharti Infratel also loses 5% despite reporting good third quarter numbers.
Interglobe Aviation surges in trade after the company reports operationally better performance in the third quarter. On the other hand, Thirumalai Chemicals tanks 20% after reporting a pretty disappointing sort of set of numbers. Graphite stocks are the other big laggards of the day.
And finally, CBI registers a case against former ICICI Bank CEO and MD Chanda Kochar, her husband Deepak Kochar, and Videocon's Sir Venugopal Dutt in the Videocon New Power case. The stock slides in trade and is the top contributor to the Nifty's losses. Those were the top 5 headlines from Dalal Street. Hello and welcome to Markets Today Talkback. This is the show where we tell you everything that happened in those 6 hours of trading in just 5 headlines. Well, today it was a story of many micros, a myriad stocks at the macro level. Perhaps there wasn't so much by way of developments either at the index or in terms of the economy. I'm Lata Venkatesh, with me Prashant Nair. Hi Prashant.
Lata, hi. Absolutely. Lots and lots of stocks to really talk about. Not very much on the index, but so the focus over the next 30 minutes is going to be just that, stocks. We will get you the top stories of the day, and we'll of course take your questions as well. On the show today to answer your questions are Mayuresh Joshi of Angel Broking. Mitesh Thakkar is joining us on the charts. Gentlemen, thanks very much, both of you, Mayuresh and Mitesh, for joining in. As always, right on the top of the show, let's spend 2 minutes looking at what really moved the market and why. And let's go right to the beginning at market open. Lata.
Well, actually, it was a mixed backdrop. Asian markets were mixed. Even the US markets were not giving a very clear green signal. There were worries of growth. To some extent, it's an advantage for us because that keeps crude closer to $60. But with the mix of growth worries, we were not picking very positive cues from global markets. And domestically, actually, well, there is always the overhang of poll and budget, but we were really reacting to results as well. The index is still within the range of that 10,750 and 11,000 or 10,980 to be precise. So actually, the markets remained, the indexes remained in the red. Like they were yesterday, though not so deep. The big surprise came when Yes Bank results were announced. It's sort of heavyweight in the index, but when it moves 10%, it moved the Bank Nifty into the green by some measure, and it also moved the Nifty. And remember, when Yes Bank moves, to some extent, it pulls up Indiabulls housing also with it. So there were 2 Nifty stocks which moved up in the last 1 hour, and that perhaps helped the Nifty a little bit. But really, today, there's no point talking Nifty. We have to talk individual stories. So I'm all ears, Prashant.
Absolutely, Lata. So let's just start with sectors, and this is where there was strength and where there was sort of pain. So let's start with strength. Real estate, energy, and IT were the 3 areas which saw maximum gains. Auto and pharma were weak across the board. Let's come to stocks. The big one, of course, was Yes Bank. It'll come up on your screen. It got to 230 rupees, by the way. I mean, moved about what? Actually, almost $30 after the announcement of the CEO. Of course, I mean, the average close is on your screen, but it went far higher than that. The average close of the last 30 minutes is what gets calculated, the adjusted close on your screen. Reliance Industries, TCS, Bharti Infratel, Tata Motors, Sun Pharma were some of the other movers, losers and gainers. So Bharti Infratel, Tata Motors and Sun were the losers. Broader losses, KPIT. I mean, of course, it was corporate action, a demerger effective today. As I mentioned, Infratel, HEG and Graphite were the graphite stocks I mentioned. Tirumalai Chemicals, big earnings reaction. I mean, down 20% at the word go. Canfin Homes, there was Edelweiss, NIIT Limited, Tejas Networks, all reacting to numbers on very large volumes, actually. I mean, even something like a Tejas, which volumes are pretty low, traded almost 1.2 million shares today. Broader gains, Indigo, I mean, started slow. You know, from 1100, which was the opening today, it closed at 1180. A big 6% move. Ujjivan was up 4%. And there was Obura Realty with 1 million shares, which ended almost 7% higher. Lata.
Okay, well, we have a lot of individual results also to talk about. But first up, let's invite our guests and ask them what they have made of the markets itself. We have Mitesh with us. Mitesh, okay, just want to know now, how do you treat the Nifty?
Yeah, good evening, Lata. I think very clearly, you know, we've kind of had a subdued day, despite the fact that it was a weekly expiry of the Bank Nifty. But with the fall yesterday, I think, you know, there was some pullback, but the overall structure hasn't changed much. The only thing is that the short-term range is given away, and I think now the market is getting into a bigger range, which was, if you look at the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks of data, 10,980 to roughly about 10,690, 700 on the downside. I think that should be the broader range. And my belief still is that there's a good chance that we might head towards the lower end of the range. So 10,750, 720 zones could be tested. Maybe if that holds, I think you might get back to about 10,900 plus level. But I don't see much of a directional movement happening till I think the budget takes place.
Okay, fair enough. So that is the broader market and the top-down view really coming in from Mitesh. We move on to the second story today. Yes Bank. Well, the bank appointed Deutsche Bank's Ravneet Gill as its next managing director and CEO. His appointment will be effective from the 1st of March. The stock, of course, rallied big time on the news. Remember, the earnings came first. The earnings were put out first. The stock barely moved. I mean, it moved about 1.5%, 2%. And then there was the announcement that, well, they have got a CEO in place. And that was the big one, which really moved the stock. They also declared a nearly 2,500 crore exposure to the troubled IL&FS group. Ritu Singh is now joining in with more on these numbers and, of course, that appointment. Ritu, over to you.
Well, Ravneet Gill's appointment has clearly cheered the investors. He brings with him 28 years of experience. Last role, of course, is the India head of Deutsche Bank, where he's been since, 2012 in various capacities. But, there is an important caveat. His appointment is only effective 1st of March 2019, whereas Rana Kapoor has to step down by 31st of January, which means in the interim, the bank, when it meets, the board, when it meets on the 29th of January, will have to strategize what the strategy would be, whether or not it needs to appoint an interim CEO. All of that will become clear in a few days when the bank meets. But then, of course, yes, the earnings were a bit of a disappointment, but it was largely because of the bank's exposure to IL&FS, which really ate into the profits. A large portion of that 2,530 crore rupee exposure that they have to the group slipped in this quarter, which was about 1,913 crore rupees, on account of which the bank had to make a significant provisioning of about 25%, which took away from the bottom line. So profits have actually declined 7% over the previous year. The net interest income rose. That was a good figure of about 41%, largely led by a 42% growth in advances. Gross and net NPAs also saw a rise in this quarter, again on the back of IL&FS, and fresh slippages also rose to 2,297 crore rupees. The bulk of it again coming from IL&FS. Now, keeping all of this in account and the fact that the divergence report is still awaited, the bank has also upped its credit cost guidance for the full year from 70 basis points to now about 80 basis points.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ritu. So really important takeaways are that if you take away the IL&FS numbers, then it's actually a big reduction in NPAs. In spite of it, they've increased the credit cost, which means they want to provide more. The provision coverage ratio is very modest now. It's only 40%. So they want to perhaps increase the provision coverage ratio. Thirdly, RBI inspection report is still awaited. That is one overhang. And a second overhang will be, will the new man resort to some kitchen sinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a positive point of view, the next step is going to be capital raising, right? I mean, but he has to come on board for that, and then the bank needs to raise capital. I mean, I think the bank was waiting for that, for the CEO to be in place. I think the stock reacted, looking, it's always, of course, forward-looking. Ankur Kumar is joining in from Kerala. He's written in with a question on Yes Bank. He's been holding 200 shares of the bank. His cost is 182 rupees. He's a short-term investor and wants to know if he should hold or sell. 200 odd shares. His cost is 182. Mayuresh, what should he do? Continue to hold?
Evening, Prashant. Oh, absolutely. Again, I think one of the major overhangs in terms of the MD CEO appointment with Ravneet Gill coming in, I think that is behind them now. And what you and Lata were mentioning, absolutely, I think the other two key issues in terms of what actually comes out through the RBI divergence report would be keenly awaited. If the divergence is not too large, because the kind of exercises that the bank has embarked upon over the last 3 to 4 quarters, the PCR obviously is inching up, which is a very, very healthy sign. In terms of recognition of their asset quality going forward as well, if there is a cleanup which probably happens, I think it is a better sign in terms of doing that from a sanctity perspective. And the third angle obviously is capital raising. So I think as the new guy comes on board, as Mr. Gill comes on board, I think what probably he does for the capital raising exercise, which is deeply needed for the bank, will be keenly awaited and watched out for. So yes,
what is the answer to the guest? I mean, does he hold or sell?
Well, he absolutely holds on, Lata, because I think the prospects are going to improve going forward. And a disclaimer, we hold this stock in our funds as well.
Okay, fair point. With that, let's get to the third headline. And that's also from the earnings corner. UltraTech Cement reported a mixed set of quarter 3 numbers. Revenue increased 18% YOY. Net profit also rose more than 6% from the same quarter last year. However, margins missed the street expectation. This is a familiar story, actually, because input costs have gone up for several industries. Nigel is here to give us more details. Nigel.
Well, Shree Cement came in with a pleasant surprise, but unfortunately, UltraTech Cement couldn't replicate that sort of a performance. To sum the numbers up, on the top line, there was a beat, margins, there was a bit of a miss, and that percolated down to a bit of a miss in terms of the net profit. Focusing on the top line first, why was there a beat? Because the sales volumes numbers came in at around 18 million tons. We worked with the number of around 17.5 million tons. What spoiled the party was that on a sequential basis, we expected realizations to be more or less flattish. Now, what we saw was a bit of a degrowth. So that wasn't good news. In addition to that, input costs spiked up. Petcoke prices were higher. You had a busy season in terms of railway freight. And also they had maintenance activity at one of the plants in central region. That's what led to the margin decline of around 100 basis points. We were bracing for a number of around a 40 basis points decline. A weak operating profit led to a miss in terms of the net profit as well.
Nigel, thank you very much for that comprehensive review. We move on to another earnings. Bharti Infratel reported an all-round beat in the third quarter. Well, the stock, though, moved the other way. It was actually from the high point down almost, 8%. On a day-to-day basis, 14 rupees lower. That's a 5% cut. The profit for the company increased 8% on a Q&Q basis. Revenues, though, declined versus the last quarter. Remember, these are better than what the street expected. Rima is here with the main highlights. Rima.
We were expecting revenues to come down by 3.5%, but they only fell by 1%. Margins came in at 41.5% versus estimates of 39%. The expectation was that this would be a weak quarter on account of the 2-month impact of the tenancy exits by Vodafone and Idea. But that hasn't played out, and surprisingly, the company's numbers are fairly resilient. What Kotak says is that we are unable to find a bottom-up explanation for much lower than expected sequential decline in the services revenues, which is why that conference call at 2:30 p.m. will be very critical. Now, some concerns going ahead that yes, Q3 was a good quarter and a resilient quarter for Infratel, but going ahead, Vodafone Idea have already announced that they want to cut down their tenancies further by about 22,000, where they have some overlapping coverage. Now, that will not happen in one go. That will happen in the next 4 or 6 quarters, which means that earnings will continue to remain under pressure. And also bear in mind, in the numbers which went by, Jio has announced that they will put up their tower assets along with fiber assets up for monetization, which means that the overall supply of tower assets in the market goes up, and investors will have more to choose from, which could put and which could have an impact on the valuations of Infratel as well. So these are not factors which are new, because of which the stock may have corrected, but these are largely some more concerns ongoing for Bharti Infratel.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rima. Let's get to a viewer question. Shawar Mohan from Bhopal has written with a question on Bharti Infratel. He says he's been holding 340 shares of the company, purchased at 300 rupees, says he's a long-term investor and wants to know if he should hold or sell. Well, he says he's long-term. So, Mayuresh, very quickly, first your turn. I want a chart view as well, but he's sitting on big losses.
No, so again, I think he'll have to have a lot of patience. As Rima was mentioning, I think the concerns are pretty much laid out on the table for Bharti Infratel. The tenancy ratios have come down to 1.89. What probably happens in terms of the monetization, even in terms of the geo assets, if that happens, I think the supply will increase, which obviously puts a huge pressure in terms of the EV per tower exercise that these companies probably enjoy. So a large element in terms of their cash flows remaining strong, cash-rich balance sheet is there, but I think the operating level will still continue to be under a lot of strain. So unless he has a longish term view, 2 to 3 years, I don't think that the stock is going to do much over the medium term. So you can look at better stocks, say within the banking space, something like an HDFC Bank is a SIP that he can probably start.
Okay, Mitesh, a quick chart view.
So Lata, I think recently the stock bottomed out around the 250, 240 zones. And I think that's where I think, good traction and good long-term supports kick in. So my sense is that I think accumulating around 240 may not be a bad idea, get his average price down. Try to exit whenever the stock is close to about 280, 290, at least he'll not make a loss. And if he buys more at 240, I think the stop loss should be around 220 on this.
All right, gentlemen, it's time for a break. We're just leaving you with a very important opinion we got from Julian May of Fiera Capital. We spoke to him ahead of the upcoming vote on account, his view on India as well, and emerging markets. Listen in. We're back in a jiffy.
China and India feature very highly in that. So we have our biggest overweights in our global emerging markets portfolios are in China and India for different reasons. As you said, the Chinese economy is slowing down, but nonetheless is continue to grow at a healthy 6+% growth rate. India is growing at an even faster growth rate of between 7 and 8% on a longer term basis. So those are the two markets really the top of our pecking order. The biggest concern we have as bottom-up stock pickers in India is being able to find stocks where there is that growth dynamic and where you are seeing very strong growth. And so I think, for example, the consumer staples sector, which is obviously has been a sort of favourite for investors for a long time. We don't see a huge amount of growth there, and from a bottom line perspective, we've been disappointed by that. But there are areas of the market where growth rate is strong.
We got you 3 of the big stories of the day. Here's the 4th one then. Stocks and news really. Interglobe Aviation surged in trade after the company reported operationally better performance in the 3rd quarter. On the other hand, a name like Thirumalai Chemicals was in focus because it was down 20% in trade right from the word go. The company reported a disappointing 3rd quarter. Sales dipped 16% sequentially, and there was a sharp drop in gross margins, which spooked investors. The graphite stocks, Graphite India, HEG, were the other casualties. Remember, these have been high-flying stocks earlier. Both were down more than 7%. I think we've got a question coming in. Neeta Neeta has tweeted to us with a question on Interglobe Aviation. She wants to know if this is the right time to put money into the stock. She basically wants to buy Indigo and wants to know whether this is a good time. Mitesh, your sense, how is it, where is it placed? How is it placed rather?
So I think, Prashant, Indigo has had a massive up move today, was up about 7%. And while, I think the medium-term trend remains on the upside, I think a good part of upside has happened since the stock has rallied from 750 in October, November to about 1187 now. So if somebody wants to take a bet, it should be more of trading nature. 1250 to about 1270 is my next target zone. I think that's where the stock is heading. So there could be another 8-10% kind of gains left, but that should be it. And if anybody wants to buy now, 1140 is your support area. So try to buy it on a 10-20 point decline, keeping your stop loss below 1140, and a target of 1250 is what I think is a reasonable one.
Okay, fair point. Thanks a lot for that. Let's get to now the last headline of the day. There's fresh trouble for former ICICI boss Chanda Kochhar. The Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, has registered a case against her husband Deepak Kochhar, and Videocon's Venugopal Dut in the Videocon New Power case. CBI has also carried out searches at Videocon's headquarters and 3 other places. The more important news came thereafter. In the probe investigation report, a paragraph also mentions the names of others who were in the sanctioning committee, and that includes people who are very much in various positions now. It includes Sanjay Chatterjee, who later went on to Goldman Sachs. It includes Zarin Darwala, who later moved to Stanchart, Rajiv Sabharwal, who also moved out, and the chairman of the sanctioning committee was KV Kamath. Homi Khushro Khan was the independent member who was in that committee, as well Sandeep Bakshi, who is now in the bank, and several others have also been mentioned as people in the committee. So it's anyone's guess how this case will proceed. They are only mentioned. One doesn't know if they will also be investigated. But really, this becomes now an overhang for the stock and how it proceeds. Also, it comes before the Sri Krishna committee appointed by the bank for internal investigation has not yet come out with its report. So it's quite possible that the Sri Krishna committee also looks at these kinds of allegations. Well, this just has gotten a little messy for the bank at a time when it appeared that it was putting back its problems.
Absolutely. Well, another story which is in the making is Z. The transaction about stake sale. Sources have told cnbc TV 18 that Japanese multinational Sony Entertainment is in talks to pick up a stake in Z Entertainment. Remember, over the Diwali weekend last year, the promoters had informed exchanges that they're looking to sell up to half of their shareholding in the company. The bidding is due to begin in the next 10 to 15 days, where the contenders may consider buying a controlling stake in the company. Sony, Z and other contenders refuse to comment on the developments at this point in time.
Okay, do we have time for a question? Well, okay, then very quickly, Mayuresh, your take on ICICI Bank?
No, so obviously I think you're right. I think that overhang might continue in terms of what comes out in terms of this entire regulatory processes. But again, I think a large element, once the stock settles down over a medium period of time, I think it will revert back to fundamentals. So I think holding on to the stock still makes sense. I think the short-term gyrations might get played out on the stock price, but I think that long-term investors should take them in their stride.
Okay. Well, out of time, we can't take more opinions. Thank you very much, Mitesh and Mayuresh, for joining us and answering questions of our viewers.
Well, that's it from all of us here. Thank you very much for staying with us. More coming up on the other side.